everyone. Good evening. Thanks for joining Kate and myself on this very special Common Application Do's and Don'ts webinar. We're heading into the end of August, which to me is like every year it's like, okay, we're heading into application season, or for some of our students who've already been working on it, we're kind of right in the thick of it. So this is a really, really good time to go over some of the things that, both Kate and I work with lots and lots of seniors, and there's just some common things that tend to come up, and we want to help make sure that parents, students, if you're out there, we can help you avoid those those issues before they come up. So with that in mind, our goal tonight, we're going to go through, there's some slides here just to kind of keep us on track, and then we are going to make sure that there's some time at the end for question and answer. So yeah, I guess I'll just toss it over to Kate. She is our kind of college essay expert here at Rutgers Edge. So I absolutely tasked Kate. I voluntold Kate to see if she would do this for us because she's so great at it. So I'm so excited that she's here, and take it away, Kate.
Karen, thank you for the introduction. My name is Kate Forman. I'm actually based I'm in Sacramento, California. So I see we've got some people who are close by to me as well. I'm a native of Chicago. I was born and raised in Arlington Heights. So it's actually really fun to see some of my Chicago peeps online as well. Feel free, like Karen said, to make sure that you ask any and every question in the chat. It doesn't matter how, silly or basic you might think it is. This is not one of those applications you want to do wrong, right? You want to make sure that you're starting it off correctly. I'm going to go through some of the basics, and then I'll swing it back to Karen, and she can give like a demo of the actual Common App so we can look at it together and make sure that we address those common questions. Just a quick introduction to ourselves. I'll introduce myself, Karen, then I'll swing it back to you so you can talk about yourself, and then we'll swing it back. So again, my name is Kate Forman. My background kind of varies. I started it at the University of Iowa. I got my bachelor's in communications, went into the real world, decided the real world was clearly not for me. So I swung back to school, and I went to UC Davis for the graduate credential program, which is where I secured my teaching credential in English. I have been an English teacher at River City High School in West Sacramento in California for 12 years. And then Karen and I hooked up around, 3 years ago or so. And I've been working with her. I work with students individually, and we work through the Common Application. We work through their essay process, the drafting, editing process, which can be exhausting, but really rewarding at the end of it, because the product that we're able to come up with is really great. I also play and I coach rugby in my spare time. So got a few things going on a lot of different levels. Karen, do you want to introduce yourself? Sure. And then I'll take it back? Great.
Yeah. So just briefly, for those of you who never, met me, and it's sad, it's been a long time since I've seen people in person. I was just realizing, since we've done a session in person, but I'm the owner and founder of the Rutgers Edge. We started this back in 2012, and it's been great. I was actually just talking to someone the other day about how when I first started the Rutgers Edge and I was doing seminars, we're having to explain to people, you can play college rugby, and this is what the process looked like. And even from where that started to now, I'm blown away by how many more opportunities there are for student athletes to continue their studies in college and, continue to play the sport that we love. Obviously tonight, we're not really going to focus as much on the rugby, but you can see there, and you can also see it on my website, obviously have a really long history, in the rugby community, not only on the education side, but, as a player as well. I have hung up my boots, so I'm no longer playing, but I certainly love getting out on the field and watching. And we just had Rugby Town Sevens here in Colorado, so it's really, really nice to see rugby kind of back in the flow. So hopefully I'll get a chance to see some of you out on a pitch soon, or in person. So I'm going to throw it back to Kate, because I do want to make sure we have enough time to go through all of the Common App pieces.
No problem. So the very first piece of advice I have is to dedicate some time to creating your college list. It's really simple to make sure that you're keeping track of it. And it's really, really important to understand your objective when making your list. Okay, so can you see my Google Doc on the screen?
Yep.
Great. So when we look at making a college list, you want to make sure that you have safety schools, right? schools are like, you look at it and you go, it's a guarantee win. You need target schools where you're likely to be accepted. And then you can add your reach schools, which are possible, but acceptance is not necessarily likely, right? So you need to be looking at admission requirements, test scores, GPAs, what essays they require, what programs they offer, right? I often talk to students who go, I really want to go to, school X. And then you find out that they don't have, chemical engineering, which is like their dream to be a chemical engineer. Well, you need to find and ensure that you are applying to schools that carry and accept and do all the things that you want from that school. I always keep a chart. I'm a big fan of a chart. It just helps keep me linear and it helps my brain separate all the pieces, right? So we create a chart which has the institution. Keeping track of the deadlines is really important. Deadlines are going to be really important, especially if you're considering applying early decision, and you want to make sure that you list your schools in terms of the importance to you. And either if you're applying early decision, make that your number one, right? Because that's the place you have to apply to first. And then you want to list them in priority of the sort of like want to get in. I really want to go to school X. I really want to make sure that I spend extra time on my supplementals at this school because it's really the place that is important to me. So prioritize based on the things that are most important to you. Oh no, I can't get back to my, I'll get back to it, don't worry. Okay, so you want to make sure that you create that college list, track your schools by order of importance. And here's what's really great. You can open up the Common App at any time during high school. So you can be a junior and creating a list and starting to look at those college requirements. My lights go off in my room, sorry about that. And once you create your account in the Common App, I know, you can start adding schools to, one, familiarize yourself with the dashboard and what it looks like without being under a time crunch. That becomes a concern for a lot of people when they wait to the last minute and then they find that, oh, I have to get this done within a week or two. And then you miss pieces or you miscalculate how long something will take. And you can add up to 20 colleges at one time, and you can remove colleges. So just because you've added one doesn't mean you can't delete it later. So you can adjust your list and start looking at the requirements for each college individually by adding them to the Common App early and often. I want to be really clear that deadlines are not suggestions. If they tell you that the application has to be in by 11:59 on November 15th, that is not, they are not hoping that you get it in that day, and they will not make an exception for you for any reason. So you need to make sure that you plan in advance, and the process does take longer than I think people would expect. There is a Common App piece of the application that you have to fill out, and then there are each school's individual pieces and extra questions and possible essays that you will need to then add to the Common App as well. So be sure that, like, if you're sitting here now and it's August 23rd and you haven't opened or started your account, I highly suggest doing that right after we get off this call. Opening your account will not be difficult, but you're going to want to get used to it and make sure that you navigate the dashboard correctly. Our recommendation typically is to make sure all your stuff is done by October 31st. That's always my goal, that by Halloween, you are wrapping everything up and you feel confident that whether you're applying early decision or regular decision, if you can get that off your plate and if you can get those applications in, you relieve a lot of stress by doing it early. You also, some schools have rolling admissions, so the sooner you get your applications in, the sooner they will give you an answer. And it's also, a lot of applicants will wait till that final day and then the system is flooded. And then sometimes, there's a glitch or there's an error, or you get a message like cannot be submitted, try again later, and you don't have time for later. So I just say early and often, right? Everything we do is early and often. Okay, so the basics, and Karen's going to go over what this all physically looks like in the Common App so you can actually see it. But the first thing I want you to know is that you do need to create your account. You're going to want to use your personal Gmail or personal email of any kind. Do not use a school email because school emails often block outside information from the system. They are an internal closed circuit. So if you create your account in a school email, you might not get the notifications you need. You might not be able to confirm your account. Like all the things that you want to be able to do can be closed off. Sometimes schools will shut emails and access to your school system off in the summer, and you want to have access to it. Or if the school system does maintenance, you'll be blocked out of your email. So make sure that you use a personal email for that. Use your legal name, whatever is written on your birth certificate. Make sure that that is what you use on the Common App. For example, mine is Catherine with a C, and then there is a space where you can add a nickname or your common name, and that would be Kate for me, and it's Kate with a K. And that way, I give them the option to use either, but I always give my birth certificate legal name. You don't want to give them the nickname that, you know, your aunts call you or your grandparents call you, because that's not recognizable within the system. So make sure you're using birth certificate legal names. It sounds crazy, but make sure you put in your birth date correctly. Don't mismark the year. Don't mismark the day. And addresses can sometimes be tricky. We don't all live at one address. We don't all live at one space. I know that when I was a kid, I had two very different households, but I chose the one that I was at most, and two that was just sort of like my home base. So I always used my mom's address. You can use whichever address if you have two homes that suits you, but make sure that you have access to that home, and make sure that, like, if anything gets mailed to that house, that you can have access to it, okay? And then your phone number, they're asking for the student phone number unless otherwise specified. This is a student-directed, student-focused application. So while you will add parent information in one of the tabs, that if it just says phone number, it's asking for student phone number, just to be really clear. You want to make sure that you give very accurate information, because this is how they will get a hold of you. This is how they will find you. Again, if I'm moving too fast or you have questions, make sure you write those in the chat. So
Do you want me to
writing.
Do you want me to show the Common App now? Would that make sense?
Sure.
Okay.
I can stop sharing. We can go through that.
Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Hopefully you all can you all see this? Okay.
Yes.
So this is a practice account, but when you sign in, right, when you made an account, you're going to see up here in the top right, it says welcome Karen, and then it says the CAID number. So just so you know, that's going to be your application ID number. If you are a student that's working with a college coach for recruitment and they are flagging your application, they're actually going to be tagging it for recruitment, this is the number they're looking for so that they can notify admissions. This is a student that's coming in as a prospective student athlete. This is their Common App ID. So that's this number right here at the top. There's these tabs right here, which we'll go over, but there's dashboard, my college's Common App, college search, and then financial aid. The one we're talking about right now is this Common App tab, which I also just call profile because it's like the main stuff. All the section here on the left-hand column, profile, family, education, testing, activities, and writing, that will go to all the colleges. So every college you add to the Common App will get all this information. So, that's part of the greatness of the Common App is you don't have to retype this stuff over and over, right? If you're going to do Dartmouth and then you're also going to do Brown, they would get all this same information. So this is kind of what it looks like. And again, Kate mentioned you can create your account if you're below, if you're not a senior yet. Obviously, if you're a senior, you might want to make this now, but it's fairly straightforward, right? So, and every time you hit continue, it is going to save that information. So if you're a student, you're like, I don't quite know what it's trying to ask me. go ahead and just skip it. Maybe you come back to it with a counselor, or you come back to it with a mom or dad. The part that tends to hold back some students is going to be the family section, making sure that you do have mom or dad around, or, your aunt, whoever it is that, your normal household. You do want to make sure, because they're going to ask questions about, did one of your parents go to, here it is, like, did they go to college? And if they did, they actually do ask, they ask for the college, right? So you're like, oh, okay. And then they ask for what year they graduated. I mean, some of that information students typically don't know. So the family part, you might need you might need a parent around to help you with that. And then, so as we're kind of clicking around, you're going to see this, again, really basic information, but so this is my local high school here that I did with a practice student. But you do want to make sure you put in the right high school, that you put in the correct date of entry, like think about when you started, and then also when you will be graduating. And then this is the part you do. I think, Kate, you'll probably talk about having your transcript, but you do need to put in your grades. Most students don't ever know this part, like what is your graduating class size? So in your senior class, are there 205 students? Are there 1,000 students? We do need to put that part in. And then you do need to make sure you're reporting the correct cumulative GPA. This should be on your transcript, that if it's over a 4.0, you're probably looking at a 5-point scale. But again, depending on where you are, like I have some students that are out of like a 10, and you would see like a GPA like this. So it just depends on your school, and the colleges will know how to deal with that. So don't worry if on your transcript it says 8 out of 10, that's what you're going to report. The college will figure it out, because whoever's reading your profile will know how your high school does grades. Okay, and then you'll see here testing, and then activities, and we'll kind of get to that as well. Did you have a slide on activities, Kate, or do you?
A brief one, but we can just stay there on activities right now, so it's probably easier that way.
Okay.
Also, to note on the family information, do not guess. If you're sitting there and you're like, oh, well, I think my mom graduated from this university, like you need to make sure that that information is accurate, and that you need to be asking those questions. So you're probably going to need your family involved for about 30 minutes. So schedule that time and make sure that that tab gets filled out correctly. You don't want to submit with misinformation. That would be a problem for you. So if you want to swing to activities, Karen.
Yep.
So activities is always an interesting section because you have options. Okay, so this is where you're going to be able to add up to 10 activities that you participate in. And you can add clubs, sports, you can add your work, right? So if you have an after-school job, so if you notice, you can drop down and you can add all kinds of different types of what they consider activities. So if you volunteer at your local church, if that's something that you do, you can add those hours in.
Yep.
Any community service you have. If one of the activities is that you support your family by like watching your younger sibling, you can add that activity in as well, right? It's called family responsibility. I suggest making this list on a document before you get here, so you can have, because they want it in chronological order. So you don't want to just haphazardly start organizing and dropping in activities and then having to go back and delete and redo it because it's out of order. You also want to consider that it's going to ask you how much time you spend doing these activities. And that number, a lot of times people will be like, well, I practice 90 minutes twice a week. But really what you're doing is you have to drive there, and you probably get there 15 minutes early, and then you have practice, and then you probably have a quick team meeting when you're done. And then either you get picked up or you have a car, so you drive home. So that 90 minutes really becomes 2.5 hours by the time you're really done. So it's 2.5 hours twice a week. It's not 90 minutes twice a week. So make sure that you're calculating all the time that it takes to get somewhere, set something up, commit to the practice, and then also get home. Because if you think about it, no matter what, while you're only maybe practicing for 90 minutes, you cannot do anything else the 45 minutes before and the 45 minutes after, because you're in transport, right? So all of those minutes count towards the collective time that you spend at that particular activity, right? Same with work, same with driving your siblings around, same with your internships. You can add job shadows to this as well. So be thoughtful in terms of those hours, because you're not spending 5 hours, you know, at your game. You're probably spending 8 between driving, grabbing Starbucks, getting there, participating, getting food, coming home, and that consumes the majority of your day, which will then prevent you, right, from being anywhere else. So add all those hours in together. You can only add 150 characters, not words, but characters. And characters include both dashes and spaces in the description of what you do. So you want to plan that out. And obviously they have a word count in documents, so you can use that as a good starting point. It will also count it out for you and let you know like where your limit is at. Make sure that you use those 150 characters wisely. So you need to edit off any sort of introductory phrases like, see how it says like participated on varsity rugby team against local teams? That is a really concise way of presenting it versus I play rugby on the varsity team and we go to Utah. That is not how you want to present it. You do not need to write in full, thoughtful, structurally correct sentences. You want to, and then you can add year and you can add awards and any of those notations that make you stand out. Which is why I think a lot of times people underestimate the activities section. And I think it's a place where we really need to spend extra time. A lot of time is dedicated to the writing because it's such a big piece and difficult piece. Do not forget about your activities and how important it is. And you want to try to come up with all 10 spaces. I recommend really thinking back to all the things that you've done and look at the drop-down choices. If you're struggling to find a way to categorize what you do, look at your options at the drop-down menu and then ask yourself, have I done any of those things, so that you can come up with 10 and then make sure that you're paying attention to all the character counts and the chronological order and the presentation of the material.
So something I was gonna say too is, you know, most students might look at this and think it has to be like an organized school activity. But for example, I did have a student who was an avid mountain biker, but he basically did it on his own, right? But he did it regularly. He did it every single Sunday. That was like what he loved to do. And a college wants to know that, right? They want to know what you're passionate about and how you're spending your time. So this person would just say, you know, mountain biking, and then there is no organization, but you could say self, and then you would just say, you know, recreational, you know, mountain biker, biked at all 5, you know, state parks in 1 year, you know, something like that, right? So it gives us a sense of, okay, this person did mountain biking for 4 years during the school year and did it 3 hours per week, 40 weeks. I mean, that's a lot of time that this person probably cared a lot about mountain biking. So again, it doesn't have to be an organized club or team. It could be something. You do yoga every single week. You had a student a couple of years ago who was a beekeeper. So that was time you spent actually did it like every day was he would go out and like take care of these bees, you know? So that was like a hobby. So think about if you have hobbies or passions or things that, you know, you're learning to play the guitar, you're doing those sorts of things, that can also go in here as well. And then, you know, these arrows, you can move up the priority. So this student, you know, we made up something about playing for ERA, but we're going to make that number 2 because we think this person does this, spends more time doing that than mountain biking. So you can kind of reprioritize your activities as you see fit of what is most important. Kate, I'm going to stop sharing if you want to go back to your slide. Just want to make sure that there weren't any questions about the main profile section, about the activities. If you have anything, please feel free to put that in the question and answer. And then Kate, I think you can probably go back to I think
I'm going to jump to here. Okay. So I'm going to kind of just pick up right where we left off,
Perfect.
I think. So we hit activities. Now keep in mind, this is just what we've been looking at and going through is just the Common App section, right? This is that space that all colleges are going to get the same information from all of you in this space and in this tab. So again, you'll do profile, family, education, testing, activities, and then we get to the really fun part, the writing. And this is the part where most people freak out, which by the way is fair.
And we have a webinar online about this, and we'll probably do another one, but if you're looking for some help on how to get started, I will email out, or you can look on our online content link. There is one about how to write your common application essay. Because that takes a long time.
It does. I've been working with clients since like June, and we're still in the middle of writing them, right? So if you have not even looked at the prompts or started the process of thinking about what you might write about, I highly suggest, especially if you want to hit that October 31st deadline, I highly suggest that you, if anything, start this process and make sure that you get going on the editing and drafting. So it will tell you, and we'll talk about how to add your colleges in a second, but once you've like added your schools, it will also tell you what schools are going to require this essay, the personal statement. And of the 3 that I added, all of them require it. I'm just getting my light back on. It's not working. Okay. So
you just look like you're doing a dance. It's okay.
I know, it's ridiculous. So there are 7 prompts and they're all fairly broad and vague, really. They seem very specific, I think, at first glance, but really most of them are kind of like a tell me about you kind of perspective, right? And the goal is that you have to write it in 650 words and no more. 2, it needs to be unique. It needs to offer a perspective. It needs to be well written. You cannot hand in a sloppy essay that lazily sort of tells a story about yourself. So, you know, and when we work with clients, it's a long process. Just the brainstorming section alone can take a few weeks to get to the story and to find the story. And the writing process, in my experience, is messy. And where you start with an essay is not necessarily where you end with an essay. And I've been doing this for a while, and I know Karen's been doing this for a while, and we often work with each other to make sure that we're getting full perspective and we're getting input. So I really highly suggest taking the writing portion seriously and taking time and dedicating time to making it work. You know, if you have access to a teacher who's willing to support you, that's great. But this is also a very specific kind of essay. This is not an academic per se, right? Like this is not a literary analysis. This is about you. There is a creative writing portion to this, an aspect that is really important. But essentially, you will choose the prompt and you'll select it here, whichever one you want. And then you will add it into the square. You can upload it from your Google Drive if you want, okay? You can copy and paste into here. I will warn you, if you copy and paste, you're going to want to read it and make sure that it formatted correctly in the way that you intended. You know, make sure a paragraph break is where it's supposed to be. Make sure all the punctuation copied and pasted. It didn't leave off something at the very end. All of those moments and all of those things really matter. Karen, other thoughts?
Nope. Keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're going to get through this part of the common application, which and all of you can start that now, regardless of whether or not you've particularly added colleges or choices. And the other added bonus is that you can actually search colleges on here, right? So if you want to add a college to your dashboard, right? So I'm going to say University of Michigan because I'm a big fan. It's a big deal for us. So, and you can click, right? And then you can add to my colleges. So now what happens once you're in the college search and you have found right? You're going to get sort of a breakdown of what University of Michigan is looking for. It's going to give you their phone and their fax and their email. It's going to give you their basic address. And it will link you to their college website. You can take a virtual tour and all the college navigating resources as well. So even if you're like, I don't know that I want to add them to my application, you can search a college, get to their dashboard, and then just start taking a look and connecting with them on social media, which will then maybe inform your choices. It's really nice that they give you all the application deadlines right on their specific college dashboard. So it's convenient, right? And you can copy and paste those into your nifty little chart that I make. But you have access to all of that on the Common App, which is really, really nice. And then it gives you other specific deadline information in case you're applying to a specific college or a specific program. And sometimes those programs have different parameters for the application process. So sometimes you can dig around on a website and find all the things. I highly recommend that as you're looking to apply to schools, this is going to be a really great way to simplify that process, because I have found that when you start searching on a college website, it's not always like all the things we want to know. We want to know, I need to know deadlines, I need to know requirements, I need to know how to get a hold of people, I need to know what the application is going to require. And this is a really great place to get that summarized for you versus having to dig through the website for each individual school. You can find it listed right here. It will even tell you like the fee for the application, so you know what you're in for, right? Maybe that edits the number of schools you can apply to. It will tell you their standardized testing policy. Really important to understand. Some schools are still requiring that you submit an ACT or SAT score. Some schools, right, are flexible or test optional. And so you have the choice whether or not to submit your test scores. And some schools won't require it at all. And this, again, is a great place to just find that information. Then it'll tell you what recommendations are going to be required. And these are all things that you're going to be able to submit through this school's specific application, because they will each require possibly something very different. And then the writing requirements. So this will tell you that the Common App, the personal essay, is required for this school. It is also telling you that you have 2 required questions that we call supplemental questions. And those will be added to this application, assuming that you continue to pursue and move forward. And those questions will be listed in this application, and then you will be able to answer those as well. And they'll have specific and individual requirements for those supplements. I've seen questions that are as short as this one. I did a Yale application last year. One of the questions required 47 characters. It didn't say 50, it didn't say 25. It said you can write in no more than 47 characters. And it was a complex question. It was, if you could have dinner with one person, who would it be and what would you ask them? So you have to do all of that in 47 characters. And then I've seen supplemental essay questions that are 350 words, right? And that changes the whole dynamic. That's a whole other additional question and an essay response you have to build. So this is a really good way to get all that information. So then what happens once you add a school? You can go to my colleges. And now you'll see on the left, right? And I just added a few earlier. You will have a drop-down menu for each of those schools. And the school will give you a few things, right? It gives you that same basic dashboard information. It's now listed here in my colleges. You can go to questions, and this is where you will get additional school-driven questions. It's going to ask you when you want to start, what your admission plan is, right? So this is where you get to decide early decision, early action 2, or regular decision, all of which will have different due dates. So you want to make sure, again, that you're planning accordingly based on your selection. Your testing plan, you can, for Michigan, you can say, I want you to consider my test scores, or you can say, I do not want you to consider them. Either you're planning to take them or you're not, or maybe you don't get the score you want. So you can opt out of that as well. Do you intend to pursue? And then there's a lot of like basic questions that you'll go through. Oh, this is Lawrence, this isn't Michigan, right? And then again, I've read, and then you'll sign, and then you'll continue. Is it gonna let me continue? It's gonna ask you things like what academics you're pursuing. It's looking at for this one, it gives you the option to submit your resume. If you want to, you can actually upload it. It will ask for contacts. Again, family information, right? A couple of basic questions like, has anyone ever attended Lawrence? And then other. Okay, so this one has short answers below are 2 questions, and then you would answer them right in the box. I would suggest drafting these on a separate document and then submitting them that way to make sure that you hit word count or character count, and make sure that you really, right? Look again here, 47 chosen words, right? Like that's a strange number. I don't know why 47 is such a big deal. But pay attention to all those things, because when they ask you for 47 words, they don't want you to answer in 20. And they want you to answer 45 to 47. Pay attention to those requirements. And then you'll sign and continue. And then this is where it gets really fun. So you need to send in recommendations, typically from a couple of teachers and a counselor. Then I'll tell you how I would recommend you do that in a second, but there is also this FERPA release authorization. It looks intimidating. I often get the question like, oh my God, what do I do? How do I deal with this? It's really okay. What you're releasing, what you're authorizing is that when you submit your letters of recommendation, or you request them rather, you are authorizing that the people who are writing on your behalf can then submit it without your review. That's what you're authorizing. And you can learn more about it here. It will go through all the things and tell you everything you need to know about it and answer all the questions. It's a privacy notice, essentially, that if you're asking for someone to write a letter of rec on your behalf, you're authorizing that you don't have to view it before it's submitted. They can submit it directly to the college. You can choose not to do that. I would recommend that you offer them that option, because you're also not asking someone who doesn't like you to write you a letter of recommendation. I've never written a bad letter of rec. And I've always submitted them on students' behalf. So you just have to complete the release. Okay. You've read and you understand, and you click, and then you're going to continue. Then I acknowledge that every school. Okay. And then I waive my right to review. That's the key. When you get to this one, you can hit I do not waive, but that makes the process a little bit more complicated. I highly recommend that you waive my right to review.
Your teachers and counselor may not want to do it if you don't waive it.
Yeah, 100%. And you understand, and you have to click the one that says you understand that once you select that, it's going to apply to all your colleges, and then you sign, and then you save and close. Okay. And then you'll be able to go to your recommendations, and then you're at the application submission space, right? And then now it's giving me the big yellow warning sign because I haven't done anything in this application, so I can't submit it, right? So you're looking for everything to be checked off and done. Look at all the things I have to do. Karen, input other than that?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to the Common App tab,
yeah.
So once you finish a section, like if we finish profile right now, we would see a green check mark. You finish family, you'll see a green check mark. So if you're a parent and you're looking, helping to overlook something, if you see a section that doesn't have a green check mark, something's missing. It could be really small, but just, you should see all those green check marks before you submit. And when you submit, they're going to give you a couple different things to do. When you click that submit button, it'll allow you to do a PDF preview. I would do the PDF preview, like download the PDF, look through the whole, like that's what I would do with a student, is like, let's look through the whole thing and make sure that Absolutely. You typed in your address correctly, or, all those things that Kate mentioned in the beginning. Sometimes it's different going screen by screen versus looking at the whole thing as a whole, which is how a college is going to review it. So when you get to that submit button, I would definitely do a PDF review of that. Yeah. Oh, so did you already show them how to, I don't think, just kind of adding colleges. So let's say you're Kate and you've got these 4 colleges and you're like, oh, but I want to add one more. I want to add American. You would click that college search button. You just type in American, it would come up, and it's like 5 down, the one in DC, the plus button. Yep, add, and now it's going to be in your My Colleges. So once you're in there, if you decide, oh, I don't really want to apply anymore, you can remove it as well.
It's just at the bottom, so you can remove it.
Yep. I do want to make sure, are there any, I know we're going a little bit fast, but are there any questions or anything, any concerns right now? Kate, if we go back to your slides, was there anything, I know we had talked about it, was there anything specific we haven't touched on yet?
I don't think so. This thing makes it really, there we go.
Oh, additional info. That's good.
Yeah. I'm just trying to move this out of the way. There we go. You do have a space. And sometimes this is really good right now, given the condition of the world and perhaps your personal circumstances. There are spaces where you can add additional information. It's a writing section. It's separate from your personal statement, and it can be up to 650 words. And it's a really good place to add any information that would be really vital for an admissions counselor to look at and understand about you. Because maybe there was a dip in your academics over the pandemic and with virtual learning. Perhaps you had extenuating circumstances, right? Maybe you had to get a job. Maybe you needed to be working over the course of the last 18 months to help support your family. Maybe you had to switch schools. Maybe virtual learning wasn't for you and it was a definite struggle. Maybe you were dealing with mental health issues over the course of the last year or any time in your life. Okay, so if there's ever a space where you want to be able to explain those situations and those parameters and clarify anything, it's a really good way to clarify something that might look concerning on an application. If your freshman and sophomore year, you had, B+ to A average, and then your junior year, there was a significant dip, then this is a really great way and a great opportunity for you to be able to explain what happens. So I would, again, take that opportunity seriously. Do not use it as a way to just complain and rant about the situation. And you don't want it to be one big, long social media rant, okay? You want it to be a space and time where you can explain in writing, look, I know and I recognize that there's a gap on my application or there's a dip in my GPA. And I know that, but I can also in ways justify it or explain it to where it would make sense and why it would make sense then for you to admit me as well. So that's a really important section that you can get to as well. It's not mandatory. So if you don't have a situation like that, don't just write to write. Don't just write to share that you like unicorns or whatever. That is not what that space is for. Other perspective, Karen?
Yes, so just so everyone can see, I'm gonna share my screen really quick.
Yeah.
It's gonna, because I think it's easier to explain. So
perfect.
Awesome pandemic changes. This used to not be in here, but just because Kate's kind of talking about it. So we're in the writing section, there's additional info. There is an additional section here that says you can use this space to describe how the events of the pandemic have impacted you. So this is more specific to COVID, so those things that Kate talked about, if you had to take on a job, if you had more family responsibilities, that would go in here. And then here is this other, you may use the space below to provide additional info. So if you have other info that has really nothing to do with the pandemic, you're like freshman year, I was diagnosed with diabetes and that was really, took a long time and we figured this out and that did affect, my academic record. That is where you would put that. Now, I will tell you, counselors have kind of conflicting thoughts about what to write here because some students will say, I don't have kind of anything bad. Luckily we were safe. We had our home. My parents kept their jobs. Maybe we were just kind of bored. Like if you are blessed to be like that, they're like, I don't know what else to say. However, you can also use this space to talk about how the pandemic may have added something positive to your life. You picked up in that time because you had more time. You learned how to do photography. You decided to try, painting or something like that, right? You could use this as a positive impact. It doesn't have to be negative. So I look at this as, you don't have to put these things in here, but if it adds more to who you are, it helps an admission officer, get to know you better, really, right? This is all they're going to get. You can certainly use that space to explain that. Yeah. So hang on, I'm going to stop my share there. And I do want to make sure I'm answering questions. There was one question earlier when you showed the Lawrence. It showed a couple different options for application. I do want to touch on that really briefly because I think we're hoping everyone understands that early decision, early action, they're the same deadline. It's November 1st, but early decision is the binding option where if you are accepted, you have to go. Basically, you're saying you're my number one. I absolutely want to go. Early action is basically you're applying early in the earlier timeline and you're notified earlier. So both of those options, you're notified by December 15th. Lawrence had an early action 2, which I've actually never seen before. And a student noticed that and was like, what's early action 2? So early action 2 is the same. It's like just another earlier deadline. I'm assuming with Lawrence, it would be like December 1st and you still get notified earlier, but it's not binding. So if it's EA, that's non-binding. It helps you out as a student of getting, all your, notifications earlier versus regular, which normally you don't get notified till, sometime like March or so. And then rolling is you could apply today and you would know in the next few weeks. And then there's a question here about, would it be beneficial to write about SAT scores being low in this section? So that's a good question. I think I hate saying this all the time, but like, it depends, right? So if your scores are low because it was impossible for you to study because of your home situation, like maybe, that would probably be something I'd want to also look at what your current academic profile is. If you have a really strong academic profile and you don't have good test scores, I don't even know if that I would highlight something like that. I would just leave it test optional. So, unless there was some really weird situation, like maybe I would say you would, but normally the additional info section, you are kind of stating the facts, like this is what happened, this is the result, and then also like moving forward, this is what I've learned. Something like that. Hang on, I think I have another. So hopefully that answered your question. Someone wrote, where's the COVID effects writing question? So it is under the writing section. So I'll just show it again. So if we're on the screen, we're under that Common App tab right here under writing. This first kind of section is the personal statement, right? Personal essay that Kate went over. If you go down, you copy and paste your essay, and then right underneath it is additional info. And then this first section is kind of the COVID impact one. And then this is the like any other info that you want to share.
I will say, if you want to answer those questions, you have to click yes. They won't populate until you say like, do you wish to share anything on the topic? If you click yes, then the box will appear. Yeah, good. I'm glad you found it.
Perfect.
And if you hit no, or you leave it blank, it will just stay non-existent to you.
Yeah.
The only way to find it is to click yes on those questions.
So we have a few more minutes left on this webinar. And thank you everyone who have been hanging out with us this evening. Just want to make sure to give you time if there's any last questions or any issues. It can be about Common App. It can be about anything else. I was going to throw out that obviously we're showing you the common application, but if you are applying to other schools that don't use the system, it's a whole other thing as well. So for example, if you're applying to University of California, they have their own system. So if you're doing Berkeley, Davis, UCLA, that's a whole other thing. You're not going to find that school here. Cal State, same thing. They have their own system you're going to apply to. Other schools, like University of Washington or something like that, they're going to use another one called Coalition. So it goes back to, you really have to figure out what your college list is, and then you would see, okay, how many of them are Common App, how many are Coalition, how many are UC. So you also then have to know, okay, it took me like a couple hours to fill out the profile section for Common App. You kind of have to do it again for the UCs or for, you know, another platform. So what I would normally do is like at least do one all the way through. And then once you have the other one, like you can open up both windows and then you can at least just copy and paste the description of activities. You know, you don't have to completely redo everything. Okay, so question here, and maybe I'll give this to Kate too. Any guidance on how to choose the big topic for your essay?
Pass to me?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So again, like I said earlier, I find the writing process to be very, very messy, and I always encourage my students to sort of embrace that chaos. So if you're looking on how to choose the big topic, I think one of the questions I always get is there a question I should choose? Is there a one that's going to be like a guaranteed win? And honestly, it's not about which prompt you choose. It's about the quality, clarity of your writing. So the very first thing I have everyone do who works with me is brainstorm each of the questions, right? I have them do it themselves. I have them actually write down any ideas that they have for each question, and to delete questions that they go, I have zero interest in talking about that. Because I don't want to waste my time trying to dig a story out of you. I want it to be fairly organic. The second thing I have them do is have their parents fill it out and write down anything that their parents can remember or add to those brainstorms, because sometimes that clicks and that creates additional conversation. I always want to choose a story that has a unique perspective. So if you're going to tell a story about sports, you want to avoid things that are cliche and overdone. So in all honesty, no one cares anymore that you scored like the winning touchdown, or, you know, you won a championship. What the essay is geared towards and looking to find is something about your character and about who you are developmentally that is important. How have you grown? How have you changed? How have you shifted? How did you learn to be the better version of yourself? How did you persevere through a difficult time? But there's always the second part of the question is, and what did you learn? So if you say that like, I just really tried hard, but I didn't really learn anything, then we're not answering the question correctly into its full capacity. So, you know, I have a big sports background. I really, really do. I've played sports my whole life. I come from an athletic family. We all do the thing, right? And so in my world, I would probably tell the story of some sort of athletic something. But to be very honest, I wouldn't choose, and the rugby team I play for, we won the 2019 national championship. But honestly, that's not my story. My story is that the December before that season started, I ended up in the ICU for 7 days. And then I had to find a way to show up to practice when I, you know, had nearly died. And then I had to talk about and then I would talk about the physical therapy. And then I would talk about the mental challenge of showing up and not being at 100%, right? And not getting minutes because I'm not as strong, and what that did to me emotionally. And then winning was great, but I had to be okay with winning, even though I wasn't the best participant because I was dealing with so much. That's a sports story worth telling. because there's more depth to it than we won. Because at the end of that story, you shouldn't care whether or not we won or lost, right? What matters in that story is that I went through something and it happened to be during a sports season. So that is my very long-winded answer to your question, which is find the piece of the story that is uniquely you. And that is a difficult thing to do. I will warn you. So, you know, we always love to help you. So you can always reach out to us separately if you need more support in that area as well. And hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. And I'm going to say something, and then also there's a really good question that came in. So I do want to answer that. I think something that I would recommend for students, if they're like, I don't know, like, I don't know what to do. Often you might want to think about what is that thing that you think about before you go to bed? What is that thing you think about literally as soon as you wake up? Or what is that thing you're always looking forward to doing? Or if you came upon a stranger, or I came up to you and was like, so, you know, what's something about you that you want me to know and that you would literally talk all day long about? That's what you would write about, right? Like I could talk about how we've been fostering dogs and rescuing dogs for many years. Not just that we do it, but like why do we do something like that? Now, the reason I would write about that is not because I think maybe an admission officer cares about rescue dogs. I mean, I hope they do, but what I'm hoping they would get out of that story is they're learning that I'm caring, that I'm compassionate, that I, you know, am proactive about things that I care about. You know, with Kate's story, it's like, it's less about the rugby. If she were to write that essay, we're thinking about, you know, how does she motivate herself through really difficult situations? You know, there were moments where she wanted to quit, but she kept going out there even when she didn't feel good. So it's like, what qualities about you am I pulling out of this essay? It's less about what you're going to write and like why you're writing it. You know, I don't care that you're writing about skateboarding or surfing, or, you know, I have students that are like, well, this topic's really frivolous. And I'm like, no, like that's not my job to tell you what matters, as long as it matters to you. You know, it's actually worse when someone's like, well, I'll write about my community service because that's what they care about. And I'm like, well, no, do you care about your community service? And if you can't even talk to me and tell me why it's important to you, it's probably not the right topic. It's got to be something you're like, I probably could write 10,000 words on this, right? I love it so much. So that's the topic that I would think about. I did have a question here, and then we're going to kind of wrap it up because I know it's a long time for families. So I do appreciate you. Someone asked if you have an 1160 SAT score, is it better to go test optional or publish the test with the schools? If you have this 3.6 GPA, you're also taking AP courses with good rigor. So this is a good question because it always comes up like, do we test optional? Is so weird, right? Do I want to submit it or not? And in order to explain, what I would do is, it depends. It depends on the school and what a typical student getting into that school has scored in the past, right? And where you are. So let's say you're looking at American University, and we're looking here, the middle 50% of scores. Okay, at this school, and I don't know your breakdown, but let's look at this, right? So they've got, on average, the middle 50% scored a 630, you know, in the critical reading. So we're going to add that with a 590. So the minimum is a 1220, right? And then you said you have an 1160. I wouldn't submit it to American because you're below the middle 50%. So I would only send a score if you're here in the middle or higher. And you can find this if you have a school that uses like Naviance or Maya Learning, all of those colleges, you'd be able to see what their middle 50%, or if you look on a school's website, you look up something called a common data set. That is something that colleges report every year. You'd be able to see what the middle 50% of scores are. You want to see if your score is in the middle or higher, and if it's not, so for that one student, if you're looking at American, I would go test optional with that GPA, right? Because even if you look at this too, the average GPA for American is a 3.65, your GPA is a 3.8. I would leave it at that. I wouldn't submit the test score. So hopefully that answers your question. And then last question here, and this is really good. I know there's lots of questions about test optional. Is it bad to not send in an SAT score in general? So prior to all the pandemic, I think there always was like, are you not sending it because it was bad? Like, et cetera, et cetera. You know, are you test optional? What does that really mean? Right now, there are certainly a lot of students that literally cannot get a test. They don't want to sit in, they're aren't able to get vaccinated, or they're immune suppressed, and they can't be in a room for 6 hours at a time with 30 other students to take this test. They can't take a test, and the colleges have gone to test optional in order to allow access, right? They don't want to penalize students that like can't take a test. Think about international students as well that are in quarantine, that can't, whatever, right? There's lots and lots of situations right now that are preventing students from testing. So right now, in 2 years, if we do this, maybe that changes, but I would stick with the plan of, if your test score is below the middle 50%, I wouldn't submit it. Okay. So thank you everyone for all of your great questions. I'm gonna, Kate, is there any last thoughts or anything before we go for the evening?
I feel like we covered it all. I just want to thank everyone for joining us. I really appreciate all the questions, and they were really, really great. So thanks for coming out.
Yep. And then stay tuned. If you're not signed up for our newsletter, follow our Facebook page or anything like that. We're certainly going to do some more webinars coming up every month to help you through this process. We know that it can be, overwhelming for a lot of families, especially if this is your first time. And as Kate mentioned, if you are looking for more support with applications and essays, both of us are still working with students. So feel free to reach out to us. I will send a follow-up email. You can also reach me at Karen@rutgersedge.com or Kate@rutgersedge.com and get started with us soon. So thanks everyone, and have a great evening. Bye.